Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to another episode of NCERT International Relations. Today, we are going to discuss our dear neighbor Pakistan, probably our most problematic neighbor. We will focus on all the wars and conflicts that have occurred between India and Pakistan in complete detail. These topics are covered in NCERT books, class 12 textbooks, in contemporary world politics, and as well as in politics in India since independence. So I'm going to club all those topics together and I'll take you beyond the NCERT books so that we thoroughly understand these critical developments that have shaped India Pakistan relations. So, if you have to better understand the contemporary relations between the two countries, you need to look at these wars and conflicts. So, before we start, please take a look at all the topics that we are covering under the NCERT series. Today is episode 7, and we still have many more classes to come. So please ensure that you maintain a detailed notes of whatever we are discussing, especially if you're a beginner, if you're just starting your preparation, if you're starting your optional for PSIR. Whatever we cover here is extremely important, especially for your mains examination. Plus, we'll discuss a number of important facts, a few important locations, which could be relevant for the prelims exam as well. So before we start, I would like to tell you that this course that we have planned is a comprehensive course. We are not only covering these topics and teaching them in detail, we are also conducting practice sessions. Every Thursday and Friday at 3 p.m. on the Unacademy app, we have scheduled free quiz and practice test sessions. So last week, I've already taken a couple of sessions related to these topics. So this week, again, Thursday, Friday at 3 p.m., we are going to have the upcoming sessions and we will continue this till the 31st of August. Now, if you want to access all these classes, you just have to scan the QR code on your screen. There is a web page that you will be able to get, and all the sessions are listed over there. The links for these classes are available. The reason why we are conducting a comprehensive practice quiz program is because on 31st August, as we bring this series to an end, we will conduct an NCERT mega quiz on international relations, where you will get 50 questions of UPSC standard to attempt to test your preparedness and to revise these topics again. The test will take place between 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. again on the Unacademy app. And for the test link to enroll for this mega quiz, you just have to scan the QR code on your screen. Now, those who perform well, the top performers, will get 20% additional discount on Unacademy Platinum subscription. And also, if you want the PDF of these sessions, scan this QR code. By tomorrow, I'll be sharing the annotated PDFs over here. With this, let's get started. When you talk about India-Pakistan relations, many people have a wrong assumption that the first major issue which erupted was the Kashmir issue. Yes, Kashmir issue erupted immediately after independence. But much before that, there were other issues that Pakistan had tried creating for India, starting with Junagadh, where Pakistan was actively interfering with the creation of the Indian Union post India's independence. I'm sure you must be familiar with the Indian Independence Act of 1947 that created the two dominions of India and Pakistan, as the British were all set to leave the subcontinent and they were setting up two states, a partition based on religious lines, and prepping the subcontinent region for eventual decolonization. So during this process, the Indian Independence Act gave three options for all the princely states that were present, the hundreds of princely states. They either had a choice to join India or join Pakistan or even opt for independence. These three choices made it all the more difficult for India to ensure that some of the princely states integrated with the Indian Union. So the first trouble began in Junagadh. And where is Junagadh located? Junagadh was the then princely state in the Saurashtra region of today's Gujarat. The princely state of Junagadh was ruled by a Nawab with majority Hindu population as his subjects. Now, as you can see, Junagadh is not geographically contiguous with Pakistan. right? It doesn't share a direct land connection, and it is completely discontinuous from a geographical perspective. So the Nawab of Junagadh, who had reached out to Muhammad Ali Jinnah, was looking to push Junagadh towards joining Pakistan to make use of the Indian Independence Act and the choice it had given. And he was resisting the merger of Junagadh into the Indian Union, despite Junagadh having a majority Hindu population. The majority of the subjects of the Nawab, their desire was to be a part of India, but primarily driven by communal ideology. The Nawab was aligning with Jinnah's Pakistan, and Pakistan was actively encouraging this tendency. So, this created an incredible challenge for India, much before the Kashmir issue came up. So, eventually, India had to use various tactics to force Junagadh to merge with India. India tried negotiating with the Nawab, but the talks fell apart. India tried offering incentives, which did not work. So finally, pressure tactics, coercive tactics were employed by Prime Minister Nehru and the Home Minister Sardar Patel. India imposed a complete blockade on Junagadh, as it was essentially an enclave of sorts, surrounded by India on all sides. A complete blockade was imposed, which restricted trade, creating a crippling shortage of essential items, including a food shortage in Junagadh. Eventually, forces, armed forces were mobilized to bring that coercive pressure on the Nawab. And following this pressure exerted by India, the Nawab fled Junagadh and sought shelter in Pakistan. Later, it was his wazir who signed the instrument of accession, merging Junagadh with the Indian Union, following a plebiscite that India conducted. As you know, plebiscite is a form of a direct election, right? Where the territorial sovereignty of a region is in question, is in dispute, where the people are asked to vote whether to join country A, country B, or to opt for independence. As majority of the people desired to join India, the plebiscite went in favor of India. And this was essential because this was not any other annexation. It was not a forceful military annexation by India. This was a willing merger with the backing and the support of the people. So this would ensure that international legitimacy would be provided for the accession of Junagadh into the Indian Union. So it shows how India was being a responsible power while Pakistan was trying to meddle with internal matters. It was trying to create challenges for the Indian Union. And it did not end with Junagadh. We saw the same in the case of Hyderabad. The Nizam of Hyderabad, who ruled over a majority Hindu population again in areas of today's Telangana and Hyderabad region, parts of today's Maharashtra, parts of today's Karnataka. All these regions, they were part of the then princely state of Hyderabad, be it Raichur, Gulbarga, Bidar, Koppal in Karnataka, or the Beed, Latur region of Maharashtra, and the Hyderabad and the Telangana belt that you have today. So the Nizam was clearly inclining towards Pakistan and was seeking to merge Hyderabad with Pakistan. And again, there was no geographical contiguity. There was no way India could allow Pakistani enclaves or islands of Pakistan inside Indian territory. That would have been a security nightmare for India. So eventually, the Nehru government, led by Home Minister Sardar Patel, exerted tremendous pressure on the Nizam. India first engaged in talks, offered incentives, but after all these options had failed, India had to resort to the use of force under Operation Polo, launched in 1948. See, in Hyderabad, things had escalated really quickly because the Nizam relied upon a private militia, a notorious radical extremist militia known as the Razakars, who were committing brutal atrocities against religious minorities and as well as the majority Hindu community. So large scale violence was taking place. So the Indian armed forces were essentially sent in to disarm the Razakars and to bring that pressure on the Nizam to force Hyderabad to merge with India. And eventually, the instrument of accession was signed, ensuring that Hyderabad became an integral part of the Indian Union. I'm telling these stories to you before talking about the Kashmir issue and the wars and conflicts between India and Pakistan because I want you to understand that right from the beginning, right from 1947, even before our independence, Under the leadership of Jinnah, leaders of the Muslim League and the state of Pakistan, which was about to take shape, it was obsessed with targeting India. It was obsessed with destabilizing India. And that is what we'll try to learn. What explains this Pakistani obsession to constantly meddle with India's internal matters, to try and destabilize India? What is the logic behind all of this? That is something we'll try to understand by the end of today's class. So please pay attention. The topics we are discussing today are not only sensitive, but equally important for the exams. So I promise that it will be a detailed, elaborate discussion focused on the mains exam with some relevant facts for prelims as well. So before we start, I would like to inform you that Unacademy is now offering its subscription at the lowest price ever. If you're an aspirant looking to prepare for 2027 and beyond, this is the right opportunity. The Independence Day offer has been extended till 19th August on popular demand. Many students wrote to us requesting some more time because this is probably the best offer from Unacademy. It's not only the lowest price for the subscription, there are many added benefits that you can avail if you enroll within the offer period. So the offer has now been extended till 19th August. It will end tomorrow. You will also stand a chance to get 100% refund. 80 lucky learners will get a 100% refund in order to mark and celebrate the 80th Independence Day of India. You will also get free extension on your subscription. If you take a 15-month subscription, you get 3-month free extension. If you take 24-month subscription, you get 12-month free extension. And if you avail a subscription of 2 years and above, then you will also get CSE Assure Guarantee along with subscription to Indian Express. Under CSE Assure Guarantee, let's say for some reason you don't clear the exam in your first attempt despite your best efforts, then we will extend your subscription completely free of cost so that your preparation can continue for the next attempt without any disruption. And the Indian Express subscription, which will cost you around 1500 rupees, comes as a part of the Unacademy subscription. The only condition is you have to avail a subscription of 2 years and above. So by taking a 2-year subscription, you also get a 12-month free extension, which makes it a 3-year subscription along with CSE Assure Guarantee plus Indian Express subscription. It'll give you access to all the premium articles of the Indian Express, including the e-paper, UPSC Essential segment, the explained articles. Right? This is indispensable for preparing for current affairs. So those of you who are interested, please go to the description box. The links are provided below. And when you're enrolling, don't forget to apply the code IAS English, because this will ensure that the students who are enrolling for the English classes, they will be guided towards the English team, not towards Hindi and bilingual classes. So with this, let's get started with today's discussion. Let's talk about the first major conflict between India and Pakistan, the war of 1947-48, which began with the Kashmir issue. Now, when you look at Jammu and Kashmir, back then, it was one of the major princely states under British India, ruled by Maharaja Hari Singh of the Dogra dynasty. Now, in Jammu and Kashmir, the demography of J&K was very unique. The Kashmir region was dominated by Muslims with a decent presence of Hindu community as well, primarily the Kashmiri Pandit population. The Jammu division, largely dominated by the Hindu population, and the Ladakh region, especially the Leh division, was largely Buddhist, with Kargil and the Dras Batalik sectors being a Muslim-dominated region. Now, given the unique demography of J&K and the personal ambitions of the Maharaja, Raja Hari Singh, he thought about the consequences of joining Pakistan or joining India. Since the Indian Independence Act of 1947 had given a choice, he chose to remain independent for a brief period of time. Rather, he was hesitating. Though there was pressure coming from Pakistan, Pakistan's obsession was the Kashmir region is largely Muslim dominated. And of course, there was the strategic economic angle as well, given the location of J&K. So as Pakistan was pushing, Raja Hari Singh adopted a wait and watch approach, and he didn't immediately sign the instrument of accession, either with India nor with Pakistan. So for a brief moment, technically, as per the Indian Independence Act, J&K remained independent. So that is the opportunity that Pakistan exploited to its advantage. The Pakistani armed forces launched Operation Gulmarg, where they backed tribal militias from the Gilgit-Baltistan region and as well as from the Muzaffarabad region to launch a tribal invasion into India backed by the Pakistani army regulars. Pakistan made an attempt to conceal this as a people led movement, a people led invasion of the local community. But there was clear state involvement. Pakistani army regulars were directly involved in backing the tribal militia to launch this attack on Jammu and Kashmir. So obviously, Raja Hari Singh and his princely state didn't have the capability to stand up against such a massive invasion that was backed with the Pakistani army and the Pakistani state. So very soon, the invasion under Operation Gulmarg managed to capture significant territory in J&K. And under this pressure, under these difficult circumstances, Raja Hari Singh was left with no other choice. If he didn't seek help from India, if he didn't approach India for assistance, it was only a matter of time that J&K would have completely fallen under the hands of Pakistan. So under these circumstances, Raja Hari Singh reached out to India asking for military assistance. But Prime Minister Nehru and Home Minister Sardar Patel offered support, but it was conditional. The condition was that J&K would merge with India. There should be a valid basis for India to intervene militarily. So, under these circumstances, at the last minute, as a life saving tactic, Raja Hari Singh signed the instrument of accession, thus formally merging J&K with the Indian Union. That is the basis of India's claims even today. When Pakistan raises this as a dispute and questions India's sovereignty, India's argument is very simple. It's based on a sound legal rationale that under the Indian Independence Act, the legitimate ruler had a choice to either join India or Pakistan or to remain independent. So at that moment, Raja Hari Singh still remained the legitimate ruler of the princely state. Though he had hesitated, he had initially thought about remaining independent. Eventually, he signed the instrument of accession, merging the whole of J&K before its illegal occupation with the Indian Union, thus making the entire princely state a part of Indian territory. Immediately, India went to war. Right? The Indian army was deployed, triggering the first India-Pakistan war of 1947-48. The Indian forces managed to push back the Pakistani intruders. India managed to take back some of the occupied areas. But before the war could reach a logical end, before India could essentially liberate all these occupied areas, Prime Minister Nehru took a very controversial decision. Prime Minister Nehru took the matter to the United Nations and called for a ceasefire. This is where Prime Minister Nehru faces a lot of criticism. And this is a topic we have been touching upon in the previous sessions as well. Right? We spoke about Nehru's foreign policy. We spoke about the South Asia region and the chaos in our neighborhood, how India has been navigating all these challenges. See, when you look back in retrospect, if you take away the context and if you don't understand the actual circumstances, then yes, it seems like a short sighted decision on India's part to take this matter to the UN and call for a ceasefire. But please, in international relations, you cannot have a short sighted approach, right? You can't find easy answers. The world is not binary world. It's not zeros and ones. It's not right and wrong. It's not black and white. There is always a gray area, middle path that exists, right? And to look at that, you need a nuanced approach. You need to look at the context in which these decisions were made. We have understood in our previous sessions that during independence and immediately after independence, India was facing incredible challenges, from complete economic destruction by colonial rule to large scale poverty, hunger, lack of food security, with multiple security challenges, political challenges. There were other princely states as well, which were hesitant to join the Indian Union. The first priority back then was to create a strong Indian Union to protect India's territorial integrity and sovereignty. There were demands from the Northeast, demand from several other princely states to not be a part of the Indian Union. So, given the circumstances, the economic challenges, the social circumstances, look at the partition, the communal violence that was seen, right? Look at the social divisions that were present on religious lines, on caste lines. So, there were multiple other priorities at that point. And the war with Pakistan was the last thing India wanted. A war which could drag endlessly would have imposed a heavy cost on India. And also, India placed faith in a newly created institution. You can call it short sighted, but back then, when the Second World War had just ended, India had played a very active role in shaping the United Nations and the UN Charter, which calls upon the member states to respect each other's sovereignty, which prohibits the use of force. India remained committed to those goals. You can call it idealistic, right? You can say it was not built on pragmatism. But please understand, the world needed idealism back in that era to prevent further hostilities, to prevent further conflicts. The world needed value based, principle based foreign policy to some extent. So, when India took the matter to the UN, it was based on the belief that UN would be a fair system, right? A newly created order where fairness would be provided for. Yes, you can criticize Prime Minister Nehru and the policy of India at that point, calling it short sighted. But don't criticize without understanding the actual circumstances, the nuanced challenges that were present. There was very serious economic challenges, economic and social limitations. And also, don't forget, it's not that the Indian army was the Indian army of today, right? Kashmir as a theater of conflict is probably one of the most challenging terrains. If you look at the topography here, right? The Himalayan heights, the snow capped regions, the lack of road connectivity, lack of access makes any conflict here a high altitude conflict. It makes it very, very challenging and difficult, right? And the British had left behind a very rudimentary armed force, which didn't have the logistics, which didn't have the supply lines. Even our intelligence setup was lacking, right? Whatever security forces the British had set up, it had been divided between India and Pakistan as well. So any further continuation of the war would have essentially dragged endlessly with severe consequences for India as well. So, given all these circumstances and challenges, India believed that at that point, at that moment, it was the right decision to take. But at the United Nations, though the ceasefire was formalized and the war was brought to an end, India realized that global powers, especially United Kingdom and even the United States to some extent, they were clearly biased in favor of Pakistan, especially the UK. This was a result of the colonial legacy. The British, they had a sense of hatred towards India. They believed Pakistani leaders like Jinnah were a better bet, right? It was purely their geopolitical priorities. They were essentially continuing their policy of divide and rule in a way, right? Because a perpetual conflict between the two would, in a way, benefit the UK, the West. The Cold War divisions had also begun. And Pakistan, as I explained in my previous sessions, it was more than willing to align with Western powers. Unlike India's principled foreign policy position during the Cold War, Pakistan had no hesitation to join military clubs and military alliances and completely side with Western powers. So all of this made Pakistan more lucrative for UK, for London. And UK influenced United States as well. And that's where the bias comes in, that favorable treatment, that priority treatment towards Pakistan, whereas India never gets the same treatment. And it continues even today. You can see that. So the ceasefire allowed both sides to hold on to the positions that they had maintained. India did regain some territory. India did push back the Pakistani intrusion. But whatever positions were held, that was formalized as the ceasefire line under the 1949 Karachi Agreement. Now, the problem with Karachi Agreement is that to monitor this ceasefire, the United Nations gave a role for itself. The United Nations became a third party in this conflict by, by adopting a direct approach, a direct intervention, where it established the UN Military Observer Group to monitor the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. Meaning, UN military observers would be sent to ensure that India and Pakistan don't violate the ceasefire. In fact, under the Karachi Agreement, the promise of a plebiscite was also made to let the people of Jammu and Kashmir to decide their future. But for that to happen, India Pakistan had to fulfill certain commitments. Pakistan, in particular, which had invaded the Kashmir region, it had to withdraw the troops, pull back all its nationalities, ensure that a free and fair plebiscite could be held, allowing for the people of J&K to decide their political future. But since Pakistan was trying to alter the demography, it was trying to introduce Pakistani nationals from other parts of the country into Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir in order to manipulate the plebiscite. India decided that a plebiscite will never be held because it can never be fair with Pakistan. India didn't trust Pakistan to hold a free and fair plebiscite. So, given Pakistani attempts to alter the demography just to swing the elections in its favor, India backed out from a plebiscite, and this promised plebiscite has never been conducted. It has never been held. So, both sides hardened their positions, and for now, India, there was a new challenge: the role of the UN as a third party, deployment of UN military observers to monitor the ceasefire. What should have been a bilateral dispute had now essentially become a trilateral issue which had been internationalized at the global level. So, since then, India was waiting for an opportunity to eliminate the third party role, to remove the UN from its involvement, and to neutralize the UN military observer group. And we managed to achieve this many years later in 1972. And that is what we'll discuss in our session today. We'll come to that point a little while later. So, as you can see, the conflict was initiated by Pakistan. Though India managed to have a upper hand in the battlefield, you can say that diplomatically we did suffer a setback. Right? It was indeed a big setback, given that the issue had now been internationalized and it had allowed the UN to play a direct role by deploying military observers on the ground. And the UN Security Council was keeping a watch on the Kashmir situation. And this complicated things for India. So then came Pakistan's second big attempt to meddle with India, primarily in the Kashmir sector. 1965, the Pakistani army launched Operation Gibraltar, a second attempt to try and take Kashmir by force. So when you look at the disputed map of India, today we have the LOC, the line of control, which was previously the ceasefire line. I just explained that ceasefire line was formalized in 1949 under the Karachi Agreement. Line of control was formed much later in 1972, and we'll discuss that in a short while. Now, Pakistan held on to some of the occupied areas, which we today call as POK or POJK. Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Both are acceptable terms for India. Right? India considers the whole of J&K as it existed in 1947 as an integral part of Indian territory. So we reject any other version of the maps that shows the POK, POJK region as Pakistani territory, right? Especially global organizations, other third countries, even private MNCs, for example. They often depict these areas as Pakistan administered Kashmir, India administered Kashmir. India rejects these terminologies as well. So be very careful in the exams. And not just for exams, even as an Indian citizen, you need to understand India's position very clearly. We cannot use the terms Pakistan administered Kashmir or India administered Kashmir. It places both India and Pakistan at equal fault. It in a way legitimizes the Pakistani illegal invasion. Pakistan even uses other controversial terms, calling the part of the Kashmir region it occupies as Azad Kashmir. It has granted autonomy to the Gilgit-Baltistan region. We reject all those terminologies. The only terminology acceptable for India is J&K, Jammu and Kashmir. That's it. To refer to the occupied areas, we call it POK or POJK. These are acceptable, right? Even in the exam, be very careful. Never make references to Pakistan administered Kashmir or India administered Kashmir. Never make references to Azad Kashmir or just Gilgit-Baltistan. Always refer to this as Jammu and Kashmir. And if at all, let's say a question demands you to talk about POK, right? You can mention Pakistan occupied Kashmir. That highlights the legal position of India, the international diplomatic position of India. So in 1965, a second attempt was made under Operation Gibraltar. So Pakistan first launched an attack in the Run of Kutch region of Gujarat to try and distract the Indian troops, followed by a much bigger assault in the Kashmir sector. So as India faced a sudden, unexpected challenge, initially there was a setback on the Indian side. India was facing a dual pressure. A front had been opened in Gujarat sector at the Run of Kutch region, and another massive assault had begun in the Kashmir sector. This is where then Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri delivered a masterstroke in military strategy. Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri authorized the Indian Armed Forces to open a new front in the Punjab sector to take Pakistan by surprise, to relieve the pressure on the Indian forces in Kashmir and basically put Pakistan on the back foot. This is where Indian Army fought bravely. Legendary battle tanks and legendary ground battles took place over here in the Punjab Rajasthan sector. And according to reports, Indian forces not only crossed the international border, they even reached quite close to Lahore. Lahore was well within the reach of the Indian army. So, this strategy of India, the battlefield military tactics that was employed, and the pushback that India was managed to implement, this put Pakistan on the back foot, right? It didn't achieve its intended objectives, which was to take Kashmir entirely, which again displays Pakistani obsession over the Kashmir issue. So last year, when Pakistani Army Chief Asim Munir, when he called Kashmir as the jugular vein of Pakistan, right, he was not exaggerating. This is what the Pakistani establishment believes. Jugular vein, which is a critical vein that passes in your neck, right? If it's cut, a person will die, a person will bleed to death. So that is the reference Pakistan is making to Kashmir. When Asim Munir says Kashmir is a jugular vein for Pakistan, it shows the establishment's obsession with the Kashmir issue. Because the deep state's existence and survival is entirely built on the Kashmir issue. It is built on Pakistan's hostility with India. Pakistan wants regular hostility, continued hostility with India. And Kashmir issue provides that for Pakistan, for the army, for the deep state. Now, don't you think the people in Pakistan at some point would have rebelled against the establishment? As you know, Pakistan is largely a failed state, a rogue state. Economy has faltered. There is massive inflation, right? There's no focus on education, healthcare, infrastructure. There is no power supply and water in most parts of Pakistan, right? It's facing a massive debt burden. It's taking bailout from the IMF. It's receiving a lot of external funds from China, from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey. It used to receive massive funds from United States as well. It has survived basically on the donations, the aid and assistance given by the other countries. Despite all of this, why do you think there has never been a massive rebellion against the Pakistani state, especially against the deep state? That's because the deep state is constantly able to project India as enemy number one. When there's a constant real-time threat from India, it allows the army to justify its control. It controls the politics, it controls the economy, it controls every aspect of the Pakistani state. Even the foreign policy, the nuclear program, the military modernization is largely controlled by the military establishment, not by the civilian government. Last week, we spoke about the number of military coups that have taken place in Pakistan, right? Pakistan calls itself a democracy. It's a so-called namesake democracy. Though you have elected governments, it's largely engineered by the deep state, by the army. So, Pakistani obsession about Kashmir is more political, right? It's not just about taking this area. It's not just about the communal nature of this issue. It's more political and geopolitical. This is about the deep state's survival and existence. And the way they consolidate power in Pakistan is primarily by bringing up issues like Kashmir or using terrorism as a weapon against India to keep provoking India repeatedly so that India remains a constant enemy. And that justifies the expenses on the military establishment. For example, look at the Pakistani elites. Look at the army leadership, the top politicians. They're all ultra rich, super wealthy, right? The children are studying in the US, settled in Europe. They don't undergo any suffering. They're massively rich, filthily rich. But the masses in Pakistan are struggling for even a plate of food on their table. And despite this, you don't see a massive revolution, right? So someone who challenges that becomes a constant threat, an immediate threat for the deep state. So leaders like Imran Khan, for example, right? He managed to rally public support. The moment his party, Tehreek-e-Insaf, became popular, you see how the deep state has crushed the political outfit, how it has targeted Imran Khan. In fact, there is a joke amongst Indian diplomats that it's very dangerous to become a top politician in Pakistan, to become the president or the prime minister. Because if you do, there are three options how your life is going to end. either you'll be killed, you'll be assassinated, or you will be jailed, or you will be exiled from the country. You will be forced to leave your country, take asylum in some other country. This has been the fate of most Pakistani leaders, from Zulfikar Ali Bhutto to Zia ul Haq to Benazir Bhutto, the entire Nawaz Sharif and Parvez Musharraf, right? All of them have met the same fate. Either they get killed, assassinated, or they are exiled, or they are jailed. And we have seen how military leaders from Ayub Khan to Yahya Khan to Parvez Musharraf to now Asim Munir have consolidated all political power and authority in their hands, right? So during the 1965 war, though Pakistan managed to, surprise India, push India on the back foot, India delivered a very good counter-offensive, primarily through the battles fought in the Punjab Rajasthan sector, where Indian forces reached the doorsteps of Lahore, bringing tremendous pressure on Pakistan and preventing Pakistan from achieving its actual objectives. And given that it was the Cold War period, the global powers intervened immediately, US and Soviet Union. They pushed India Pakistan to end the conflict, and Soviet Union offered to negotiate. The talks took place in Tashkent, which today is in Central Asia, as you know. The Tashkent Agreement was finalized between India and Pakistan with the mediation of the Soviet Union that brought the 65 war to an end. And as you know, unfortunately, the very next day, Indian Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri passed away in Tashkent, right? Many raised questions and doubts about this development. They say that the death was under mysterious circumstances. There's a whole lot of conspiracy theories about it, right? But let's not go into that. It's not relevant for our exams. Let's stick to what is required for the exams. So the Tashkent Agreement formally ended the Second India-Pakistan War, the 1965 conflict. But this had established that Pakistan would be a constant threat for India. Though India had tried placing good faith in Pakistan, though India had extended a hand of friendship and goodwill, it became clear post 1965 that Pakistani deep state will never learn its lessons. India had concluded that Pakistan is going to be an ever present problem. And back then, we were dealing with two Pakistans, West and East, on both the fronts. In East Pakistan, terror safe havens had been cultivated as early as 1950s and 60s to extend covert support to Northeast insurgent outfits to destabilize India in the Northeast. The Naga insurgents, for example, the Naga National Council, the NNC, then Mizo insurgents under the MNF, the Mizo National Front, including its leader, Pu Laldenga. They were all sheltered in East Pakistan as early as 1950s and 60s, and a terror safe haven had already been cultivated by Pakistan to destabilize the northeast of India. So the Pakistani threat was no longer limited to Kashmir. Pakistan was looking at every available opportunity. It was looking to exploit any internal issues of India to try and target and destabilize India. And following the 1962 war with China, we discussed just yesterday that a strategic nexus took shape between China and Pakistan, where China started arming Pakistan with advanced weapons, sharing military technology, eventually enabling Pakistan to become a nuclear power by sharing nuclear material designs and as well as missile technology, and using Pakistan as a proxy to constantly keep India on the back foot. China eventually would also get involved in the Northeast via Myanmar. Using its influence in Myanmar, China started covertly backing Northeast insurgents. So this was an era where India dealt with some incredible threats and challenges, one after the other. Right? The insurgency that broke out in Manipur, later in Assam and Tripura, in Meghalaya, many of these insurgent outfits, they either had support bases in Bangladesh or in Myanmar, with covert involvement of Pakistani intelligence and Chinese intelligence. But the turning point in India-Pakistan relations was 1971, probably India's finest diplomatic, military, and intelligence achievement. In East Pakistan, a massive crisis had been brewing for several years. Since the birth of Pakistan, it was struggling with one of its biggest internal challenges in the East, Though Pakistan was trying to widen India's internal divisions and it was trying to target India, internally it was unable to handle the crisis that was brewing in the east. So you need to understand how Bangladesh got liberated. What was India's role? What was India's involvement? What really conspired? And how India emerged victorious in 1971. It's a fascinating story, one of the most remarkable military, diplomatic, and intelligence achievements of India that even today is remembered, celebrated. But in many ways, it even contributed to the cycle of hatred and violence between India and Pakistan. It all begins in 1947. The Bengal province, under British rule, as you know, was a very large province, just like Punjab in the west. In the Bengal province, the British had already infused a communal division between the Hindus and the Muslims by dividing the people on religious lines, starting with the partition of Bengal, right? Bengal had been engulfed with large scale communal violence, a clear division between radical extremists on both the sides. It was a clear attempt by the British to weaken, to target the freedom movement. But please understand the Bengali identity. It goes beyond religion. As a cultural linguistic identity, the Bengali identity goes beyond being a Hindu or a Muslim. You have Bengali Hindus, Bengali Muslims as well. Bengal as a region has always been a very progressive region, the land of the intellectuals, right? The land which produced the likes of Rabindranath Tagore, the best of scholars, academicians, intellectuals, revolutionaries, and freedom fighters. So the social harmony that existed here had already been disturbed by the British. So post partition, a clear division emerged between West and East Pakistan, right? Though it was a communal division which had been executed by the British by drawing the Radcliffe line. Post independence, a clear domination was seen from West Pakistan, primarily between the Punjabi elite and the Bengalis. See, East Pakistan had a much larger population than West Pakistan, much larger in terms of land area as well, in terms of resources, in terms of contribution to the economy. See, if you think Bangladesh today is a hub of garments and textiles, this was true even back then. Bangladesh was actually way ahead. That is the East Pakistan region then, before it became Bangladesh. It, it housed most of Pakistani industries, textiles, garment factories. It was actually making a very big economic contribution. But in return, it was receiving very less. There was a clear mismatch in the financial allocations that were being made. So in West Pakistan, the Punjabi elite from the Punjabi heartland, right, they were controlling the finances, the state, the administration, and a stepmotherly treatment was being provided to East Pakistan. Bengalis were being disrespected. Bengali language and culture was being crushed. Punjabi identity was being enforced across Pakistan, from Balochistan to Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to Sindh. And of course, the same was the state in East Pakistan as well. So, what started as political and economic discrimination eventually turned into targeted racial and communal discrimination. Under Jinnah, the Urdu language was imposed on Bengalis. See, language is a very sensitive, emotive subject. People take pride in their language, it's a question of their identity. When West Pakistan, under the rule of the Punjabi elite, the military leadership, and the political establishment, when they imposed Urdu on the Bengalis, obviously the Bengalis rejected it. See, for them, independence made no difference for the Bengalis, be it for Bengali Hindus or Bengali Muslims. They felt oppressed under the Punjabi elite from West Pakistan. They felt discriminated, and now they were facing targeted persecution. Attempts were being made to basically target their language and culture. This led to large scale protests. In 1952, a massive student led protest had broken out on February 21st, led by the legendary Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who would eventually go on to become the founding father of Bangladesh. As I said, language is deeply personal, right? It essentially represents your identity, your regional, cultural identity. So when Urdu was imposed, large-scale protests broke out by students, professors, lawyers, academics. They protested against this imposition. And on 21st February 1952, the Pakistani state used massive force to crush the protests, killing several students and protesters. It remains a dark day in the history of Indian subcontinent. In fact, after Bangladesh was eventually created, this day is now celebrated by the United Nations as the International Day for Mother Tongue. It's the International Day to celebrate one's mother tongue, to highlight the importance of one's native language. Right? Many decades later, the Sheikh Hasina government proposed at the UN to remember these martyrs who had sacrificed themselves to fight for their language, to fight against oppression. And the day has been chosen by the UN with a resolution adopted by the UN General Assembly to every year celebrate 21st February as the International Day for the mother language or the native language, right? So this led to the shaping of the Bengali national movement. A nationalistic movement started taking shape. See, what's ironic is that it took Pakistan several years to even hold a proper free and fair election. In early 1950s itself, the Pakistani military started exerting itself, right? Once Jinnah was gone, the entire culture which had been imbibed, right? The focus on religion, the focus on building a theological state, the focus on excluding minorities, right? Not just targeting Hindus, Christians, and Buddhists and Sikhs, even Muslims were being targeted. Those who wouldn't align with the radical version which was being pushed, where Pakistan was making deliberate attempts to align with the Arab strand of Islam and moving away from the more moderate strand which you find in the Indian subcontinent, teaching wrong history to their students, right? Creating a distinction between Pakistan and India and its historical ancient linkages with the Indian civilization. So many such attempts were made where the very identity of people in Pakistan was being shaped on religious communal lines. So eventually, in East Pakistan, the Bengalis could no longer tolerate this level of oppression and persecution. Whenever the Bengalis organized themselves in late 1950s, 1960s, there was violent state repression. State forces were used to crush any sort of mobilization. So finally, when the first major elections were held in 1970, it delivered a stunning result which shocked West Pakistan and the Punjabi elite. See, in West Pakistan, the then leadership under Yahya Khan, who had staged a coup and established a military rule, he was looking to make a deal with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto to ensure that power remains concentrated in the hands of West Pakistan and the Punjabi elite. But the election results delivered a split verdict where Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the popular leader, the same student leader who had fought for the Bengali language in 1952, had now championed his party, the Awami League, to a stunning electoral victory. So, when you look at the then Pakistani parliament, the number of seats for West and East Pakistan, given the larger population in East Pakistan, clearly Awami League should have been allowed to form the government. A democratic election had been won. But instead of allowing Sheikh Mujibur Rahman to form the government, they invited him to West Pakistan, trying to negotiate and strike a deal. And when Sheikh Mujibur Rahman refused to budge, Yahya Khan and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, they colluded to arrest Sheikh Mujibur Rahman and place him in custody. Essentially, the popular mandate of the Bengali people was being crushed. Elections were being disrespected. A forceful attempt was being made to grab onto power, and this was not tolerated by the Bengali community. So, under the banner of the Awami League and the leadership of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, Bengalis started organizing a liberation movement, a nationalistic revolutionary liberation movement broke out. So, there was a political section leading the political demands. Very quickly, an armed revolutionary movement broke out as well to stage an armed attack against the Pakistani state, to liberate East Pakistan and to create Bangladesh. So Pakistan would, of course, would never allow these developments to take place, right? as the tensions were brewing, as Bengalis were organizing and leading the liberation struggle, mainly the political phase of the struggle had begun. On the midnight of 24th, 25th March 1971, something tragic took place. Please remember this date, a horrific date in the history of the Indian subcontinent. The Pakistani establishment, they were shivering at the prospect of losing power, losing control. They unleashed the Pakistani army along with the infamous Razakars to commit a brutal genocide against the Bengalis in East Pakistan. So, on the intervening night, the midnight of 24th, 25th March, large scale attacks began. The Pakistani army targeted the Bengali liberation leaders, lawyers, students, professors, teachers. None of them were spared. Entire Bengali neighborhoods were burnt down. Women were targeted, raped, and molested. Large scale atrocities where thousands and thousands of people were slaughtered over the next few days. According to several accounts, the death count stands at several lakhs. This triggered a massive refugee crisis. Almost 10 million refugees crossing the border to enter India. Because don't forget, the Bengali people, be it Bengali Hindus or Bengali Muslims, they had families on the other side of the border, in West Bengal, in Assam, in Tripura, in today's Meghalaya as well. So, in order to save themselves, in order to escape this state sponsored genocide, state sponsored persecution, millions of Bengalis sought refuge in India, exerting significant pressure on India. All the border states were flooded with refugees. The state governments had to set up refugee camps in the border areas to take care of the refugees on humanitarian grounds. So, what was India doing? Of course, India was aware of what was happening. India was closely watching the developments in both East and West Pakistan, the political developments, the election results, the denial of the right of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, right? And how he was jailed, how the election results were essentially nullified. India was keeping a close watch on all these developments. And India was forced and pushed to act eventually. Why? Because on humanitarian grounds, plus it was a once in a lifetime strategic opportunity as well. The then Indira Gandhi government was driven by two objectives, two motives. One, we had a moral duty, a moral obligation to stand with our Bengali brothers and sisters, to support them primarily on humanitarian grounds, to save them from persecution and the genocide that Pakistani army was unleashing in East Pakistan. This would also provide international legitimacy, right? Most powers would back India's actions, whatever it was, covert or overt, to support and save the Bengalis who are being targeted and persecuted. At the same time, India saw a once in a lifetime strategic opportunity to probably break apart Pakistan. And that is where India got directly involved in the developments in East Pakistan. India went on to play a pivotal role in liberating Bangladesh. See, many of you might think that the conflict began in December 1971. Correct, you're not wrong. That is the overt phase of the war, right? Where India played a decisive military role to liberate Bangladesh. But the real war had begun several months before this. By 1970 itself, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had already authorized a secret war, a covert war, led by India's newly established intelligence agency, RAW, or Research and Analysis Wing. Remember, I told you in one of the previous sessions that until 1968, we had only one intelligence agency, that is the IB, or the Intelligence Bureau. IB was responsible both for foreign and domestic intelligence. But following the wars of 62 and 65, intelligence failures of IB was very evident. Because see, foreign intelligence is a different niche area. It's a different specialization altogether. You can't have the same agency dealing with domestic and foreign intelligence. So in 1968, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had carried out one of the biggest intelligence reforms by bifurcating foreign and domestic intelligence. IB was given the mandate of just domestic intelligence, and a new agency was created for external intelligence. And RAW was brought under the capable leadership of a legendary officer from the Indian Police Service. Previously, he was part of the Indian Civil Service under the British rule, later part of the Indian Police Service, R.N. Kao. Ramnath Kao, who would become the first director of RAW, shaping India's intelligence agency. So much before the overt war began in December 1971, much before that, several months before that, India had already initiated a secret war, a covert war that we don't acknowledge even till date. Obviously, these operations have to remain classified. So, from an examination point of view, you can't directly talk about India's covert involvement in a foreign country, since the Indian government itself doesn't acknowledge this role till date. But as a student, to better understand geopolitics of that era, you need to know what exactly happened. So, as part of Raw's covert war, India started arming the Mukti Bahini rebels, mainly by using the Bengali refugees who had been sheltered in the refugee camps in the border areas. They were given funds, arms and weapons, and training, primarily by the SFF, the Special Frontier Force, which I told you yesterday is the armed branch, the Special Operations Branch of RAW. It was previously Establishment 22 of the Intelligence Bureau, which was set up with support from the CIA, mainly to engage in covert operations in Tibet and against China. Later on, after RAW was formed, Establishment 22 was taken out of IB. It was transformed into SFF after the 1962 conflict itself. Now, this Special Frontier Force was brought under RAW as a covert branch, the Special Operations Branch of RAW. So, SFF units, led by commandos, primarily deputed from Indian Army, started providing covert training to the Bengali rebels. Several training camps were set up in the border areas of West Bengal, Tripura, Meghalaya, and Assam, where refugees were recruited into the Mukti Bahini. They were funded, armed, and trained by India and pushed back into East Pakistan so that they could protect the Bengalis as an act of defense, so that they could retaliate against the Pakistani army, which was committing these brutal atrocities. And this helped in sufficiently weakening Pakistan's hold over East Pakistan. So the tensions were rising. Of course, Pakistan had realized India's covert involvement. By then, global geopolitics had started changing as well. Remember yesterday I told you about US opening towards China? Initially, US had not recognized the PRC, right? It only recognized the Republic of China at that point. But by 1969, then US President Richard Nixon had made it a political priority to build relations with the PRC, the People's Republic of China. So his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, had reached out to China via Pakistan. Nixon and Kissinger, they loved everything about Pakistan. They had a very good relationship with Yahya Khan, right? They believed dictatorship is good in such countries, the country which preaches democracy, right? Look at the hypocrisy of the US. So they relied on Pakistan as Pakistan could act as the mediator. Pakistan had good ties with Beijing and with Washington. So Nixon Kissinger relied heavily on Pakistan to open up to the Chinese establishment, the communist establishment in China. And US China relations were being set up. So a new axis was emerging in the Cold War period. By July 1971, as the crisis was still unfolding in East Pakistan, an alliance started taking shape between US, China, and Pakistan, which would represent a common threat to India. Now that Pakistan was critical for Nixon and Kissinger, they would completely side with Pakistan. And the US had also become aware of India's covert activities in East Pakistan. So the Nixon administration started issuing threats to India, open threats to protect and save Pakistan from being broken apart. From diplomatic pressure to direct military pressure was exerted on India. In fact, American diplomats stationed in the US consulate in Dhaka, they were sending back telegrams, letters, highlighting the Pakistani genocide and the atrocities and calling for American intervention. But the US president, who was biased, who was a racist man, right, driven by a racial bias against India, driven by the realpolitik of Henry Kissinger, though he's a celebrated strategic expert, right? But Nixon and Kissinger's policies probably was the biggest challenge for India at that point. So, at any cost, they wanted to save the Pakistani establishment. They not only used a very racist approach to deal with this, they liked Pakistan mainly because of its military dictatorship, and they hated everything about India, about Indians, When you look at the declassified record from the White House, the language that Nixon Kissinger used about Indians and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, it's horrific. It's something you can't even speak of publicly. Explicit language, abusive language against Indians that showed their mindset, their thinking, their racist view of India. So this presented a very difficult challenge for India. The US even pushed its 7th Fleet, Navy's 7th Fleet, was pushed into the Bay of Bengal to openly threaten India with military consequences. It's even documented that US started instigating China, pushing China to carry out an attack from the north to open a second front so that India could be brought under more pressure. We were already dealing with a front with Pakistan, primarily in East Pakistan, where a covert war was taking place, where an active humanitarian crisis was being perpetuated. But parallelly, the US was trying to encourage China to attack India from the north, given their new relationship which was forming. It pushed the 7th Naval Fleet to issue a direct military threat to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. So the challenges, the difficulties were enormous, right? It was not just a military challenge, not just an intelligence challenge. It was a major diplomatic challenge. Rallying global support was critical. That's where Indian diplomacy deserves the full credit for building the right narrative, shaping the global opinion, exposing Pakistan's atrocities and genocide. Several nations of the global south, the newly independent nations, and all the other developing, underdeveloped countries from Asia, Africa, Latin America, they all stood with India. The diplomatic support was crucial at the UN because the US was conveniently ignoring one of the biggest genocides of modern times. Though it preaches human rights and democracy to everyone, it was busy building a relationship with a dictatorial regime, a brutal genocidal regime in Pakistan, and cultivating ties with an authoritarian state in China. So, this presented one of the biggest challenges for us at that point. Apart from shaping the narrative and building that global support, India delivered a diplomatic masterstroke by abandoning the non aligned movement. The non aligned ideology was strategically abandoned, if not entirely. We didn't exit the NAM. We remained a member of the non-aligned movement, but we struck a deal with Soviet Union in August 1971, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, under which the Soviets guaranteed to come to India's support and defense if India is threatened by an external power. According to several classified documents which have been recently declassified, the Soviet Navy was tailing the American 7th Fleet as it sailed through Indian Ocean into Bay of Bengal. And they deliberately exposed themselves, bringing up their submarines to let the Americans know about the Soviet presence, which means it was a warning from Soviet Union that if you decide to act against India, the Soviet Union would stand with India, probably looking to engage the US forces directly. So the global tensions had really increased at that point. Where the war here, which was about to break out, right? The covert war was going on, the overt war was about to break out. It had dragged the two superpowers during the height of the Cold War into a direct military confrontation, and potentially it could have gone anywhere. So in December 1971, as the pressure built up against Pakistan, right, India's covert war had yielded results. The Bengali liberation movement had picked up momentum. Pakistan was no longer able to control the events. So in December 3rd or first week of December, Pakistan was the one which launched the attacks against India. And surprisingly, in the Western Front, as Pakistan was now under tremendous pressure, it was at the risk of losing East Pakistan. It opened a direct front against India by launching attacks against Indian air bases in Punjab and Rajasthan, thus triggering the war on the 3rd of December 1971. But India was fully prepared for this conflict. The credit goes to the Indian Armed Forces, especially Sam Monekshaw, the then chief of the Indian Army, along with the Navy and the Air Force. This was also the first time that all three armed forces were involved in a synchronized battle formation. The Navy imposed a very effective blockade to prevent Pakistani reinforcements and supply lines from supporting and backing up the forces in the east. Many Pakistani warships were sunk, submarines were sunk. In fact, the Karachi port was set on fire on 4th of December by the Indian Navy. That's why the day is still marked and celebrated as the Navy Day. Indian Air Force played a decisive role, decimated Pakistani air bases. Pakistani Air Force was defanged within a few days. It was rendered inoperative. And eventually, India had tremendous support in East Pakistan. The locals, the Bengalis, they welcomed the Indian forces who were marching towards Dhaka. the Mukti Bahini rebels, right? They aligned with the Indian army, and the massive local support that India had made it very easy to defeat Pakistan in a moment's notice. It was a very short conflict, lasting hardly 13 days. By December 16th, Pakistan had been defeated. This image that you see here is a legendary image. It is hung in most of the army command centers, and even the Navy Air Force, they celebrate this particular image. It shows the Pakistani general in East Pakistan signing the instrument of surrender, where a country is officially accepting it has been defeated in the battlefield. This is quite rare in a conventional war, right? Even the biggest of powers have not achieved this outcome. Even US has failed to achieve such conclusive defeats in a war. So when Pakistan signed the instrument of surrender, that was the end of East Pakistan. Bangladesh was liberated. India held on to 93,000 Pakistani soldiers as POWs, as prisoners of war. Essentially, India had all the leverage, and we used this at the Shimla Agreement in 1972, which formally brought this war to an end. India had not only successfully liberated Bangladesh, but Pakistan had been split into two. Our humanitarian and strategic objectives both had been achieved. India had managed to counter the American threat and interference. Fortunately, the Chinese did not act. Right? The Chinese held back. They didn't want to get involved in someone else's conflict. So as a result, India leveraged this decisive victory at the Shimla negotiations that led to the Shimla Agreement of 1972. And this is a very, very consequential topic for the mains exam. Even today, it continues to shape India-Pakistan relations. Since India had all the leverage, right? Pakistani troops had surrendered. India held 93,000 POWs in custody. And also look at India being a responsible power. India did not target these POWs. We did not humiliate them or torture them. We treated them with respect as per the rules of engagement, as per international law, right? We took care of them. And several months later, they were all repatriated back to Pakistan with full honor, without disrespecting another soldier. You can't say the same about Pakistan, right? During Kargil War, which we'll discuss soon, an Indian pilot, Nachiketa, who was captured by Pakistan as a POW, was brutally mutilated, tortured, and killed. There are many such horrific stories, but India has always been that responsible power, right? That is what sets India apart from Pakistan. So, under the Shimla Agreement, India extracted a lot of concessions from Pakistan. First and foremost, we forced Pakistan to recognize the independence of Bangladesh, to recognize Bangladesh as an independent sovereign nation. So once Pakistan agreed, it's as good as Pakistan agreeing that East Pakistan is no longer a part of Pakistani territory. It was now recognizing the legitimacy of a sovereign independent Bangladesh. Then we extracted a commitment that Pakistan will respect India's territorial integrity and sovereignty and will promise not to interfere in our internal matters. It applied to Kashmir, it applies to Northeast India. Essentially, it was drawn from the Panchsheel principles, where two parties will agree to respect each other's sovereignty and commit to not interfere in others' internal matters. So even today, we bring up this commitment. We refer to this. As Pakistan has obviously violated this commitment, right? It has backed insurgency and terrorism from Punjab to Pakistan occupied region to Kashmir to Northeast India. It has used terrorism to sponsor a proxy war against India, right? So even now, India brings up whenever talks take place. Of course, now the relations have been broken down. But before 2016, whenever direct engagement used to happen, India would remind Pakistan of this commitment made in 1972 under Shimla Agreement. So it serves as a diplomatic tool even today to bring pressure on Pakistan, to question Pakistan, isolate it, to expose its failure to follow these commitments. We ensured that Pakistan will abide by the principles of the UN Charter. But of course, within a few years, Pakistan broke all these commitments, violated them. But the biggest takeaway for India was the renaming of the ceasefire line as the line of control. The ceasefire line that we spoke about, which was formalized under the 1949 Karachi Agreement, we understood that this was a problem because of the UN involvement, UN acting as a third party with its military observer group deployed to monitor the ceasefire. That's how UK and US were playing a role as the P5 members to interfere with the Kashmir issue in favor of Pakistan against India. Now, this was the opportunity that India had waited since 1949 to correct the mistakes of the first India-Pakistan war. So India ensured that ceasefire line was now replaced with line of control. See, nothing changed on the ground. On the ground, everything remains as it is. Whatever territories were held by India Pakistan in 1947, 48, it remains the same even today, right? But a legal change, a technical change was made. In 1949, under Karachi Agreement, both countries had agreed with the UN that this de facto boundary, temporary ad hoc boundary, will be called ceasefire line. And as per Karachi Agreement, UN Military Observer Group can monitor this ceasefire line. So what did India do under Shimla Agreement? We renamed ceasefire line as line of control. And both India and Pakistan were accepting it. So what does it mean? It means that there is no ceasefire line that exists anymore, right? The line on the ground is the same. The de facto boundary is the same. But from a legal perspective, from a technical perspective, there is no ceasefire line that exists anymore between India and Pakistan. So without a ceasefire line, what will the UN monitor? What will the military observer group do if there is no ceasefire line? So this is how India delivered a diplomatic masterstroke, a legal technical masterstroke, by simply changing the name of the ceasefire line to the line of control, eliminated the role of the UN. Since both parties have agreed that now this line is going to be called line of control, what will the UN military observer group monitor henceforth? Plus, Pakistan made a commitment. No third party involvement in our disputes. Any issue will resolve it bilaterally, only through bilateral talks and negotiations. This is the basis of India's position today. When we say Kashmir is a bilateral issue, when we don't allow any third party to get involved in the Kashmir issue, it all goes back to Shimla Agreement, and that was the biggest achievement following the defeat of Pakistan in the 71 war. But this is where a criticism comes up against the Indira Gandhi government. Many critics point out that India lost an opportunity. India should have used this to drag the war to Kashmir, to occupy all the areas that Pakistan had taken, to retake POK. Right? Many question that why didn't India use the leverage of 93,000 Pakistani POWs and force Pakistan to give up POK or drag the war towards the Kashmir theater and ensure that POK was taken back. But when you look back in retrospect, it again seems like a logical conclusion that India should have utilized this opportunity. But please understand, as a student of international relations, you need to look at the nuances, as I told you. You need to look at the circumstances that existed. 1971 was the peak of Cold War. You need to look at the global context of this conflict. It was not just an India-Pakistan war. It had dragged US and Soviet Union directly into this conflict. Now, do you think Soviet Union would have risked a bigger conflict with the US for the sake of India? The promise of support was conditional. It was specific to the Eastern Theater. It was specific to liberating Bangladesh. If India had dragged and used this opportunity to focus on POK and taking back POK, we would have not only lost the global narrative and the global support, because we would have been seen as a selfish power. Right now, large global support was in favor of India, mainly because we were acting selflessly for the people of Bangladesh, the Bengali people, standing up on moral humanitarian grounds. That global narrative would have been lost, the global support would have been lost. More importantly, the Soviet support, the promise of Soviet defense, that was not unconditional. Why would they risk a bigger confrontation with the US with potential nuclear consequences? There was tremendous international pressure, and Soviet support would have been conditional. If India were to drag the war, Soviets would have probably backed out. And not just that, Indian armed forces had been stretched over those 13 days. Yes, we decisively defeated Pakistan, but dragging the war endlessly, because Pakistan would not have given up so easily. The war would have continued in the West, and that would have drained our own resources. It would have placed restrictions on the Indian armed forces, which already were struggling with limited supplies and high rates of attrition. So, keeping all the circumstances in mind, the real intent of this conflict from the day one, from the days of the covert war, which began in 69-70 period, it was just to aid Bengali people, finally liberate Bangladesh. It was never to mix it with Kashmir issue. Both are two separate issues entirely. So mixing one with the other would have most definitely backfired on India. The reason why India came out on top is because we strictly kept it specific and limited to liberating Bangladesh. Some even argue, why didn't we occupy Bangladesh? Why didn't we integrate Bangladesh into India? That was never India's objective. That would be an annexation, right? International legitimacy would not be there. India would be questioned as an aggressive power. That's not what India wanted. The reason why India gained an upper hand and won this war decisively is because the military and political objectives were very, very clear from the start. That's why credit goes to the Prime Minister, the leadership, the heads of the armed forces, particularly Sam Monekshaw, Arinkau, the head of RAW, right? The military and political objectives were clearly outlined. Our intention was not to occupy East Pakistan. It was not to liberate POK and take back POK. The objective was very, very simple. Stand on moral grounds, stand on humanitarian grounds, help the people of Bengal region, liberate this region, create Bangladesh, split Pakistan into two parts, which in itself is a big strategic victory. Anything beyond this would have backfired on India. So, given these circumstances, India kept the war tightly limited, and the focus was very, very clear that liberating Bangladesh was the priority. But of course, this became Pakistan's biggest embarrassment, right? It's Pakistan's biggest humiliating moment. They officially surrendered in front of the world, lost more than half of their country, 93,000 captured as POWs. There can't be a bigger humiliation than that. So this led Pakistan to swore to take revenge against India. In mid 70s, Pakistan adopted this strategy of bleeding India with 1,000 cuts. It realized conventionally India is superior. It had fought three wars with India, it had lost all three of them, right? In 47, 48, it didn't achieve the objectives of taking Kashmir. India pushed back Pakistan. In 65 again, Pakistan made an attempt. India managed to push back Pakistan. And 71 was a decisive victory, with Pakistan losing more than half of its territory. So Pakistan learned one crucial lesson, that India is conventionally superior. It can't be defeated in a conventional war. And that's why it started adopting asymmetric tactics. It started adopting covert proxy war as a strategy to bleed India with 1,000 cuts. So we'll come to that. But first, let's look at another conflict, a limited conflict that took place in 1999, the Kargil War. This was an attempt, again, by the Pakistani army under Parvez Musharraf to alter the status quo with India. According to reports, the Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was kept in the dark about these plans. Pakistani intruders, with the help of tribal militia, had occupied Kargil Heights in the Dras, Batalik, and Kargil sector. This, in fact, constituted a big intelligence failure on India's part as well, as the Indian army and the intelligence agencies had failed to detect the Pakistani intrusion. But once it was detected, the Vajpayee government took some decisive action to evict the Pakistani intruders who were occupying the Kargil Heights. But India was very clear that we will not allow this conflict to spread and extend, because that is what Parvez Musharraf would have wanted, a bigger confrontation. Because don't forget, by then, both India and Pakistan had conducted their nuclear tests in 1998. It was the first time in human history where two nuclear armed rivals were fighting a direct war. Something which never happened even with US and Soviet Union was taking place between India and Pakistan. So there was tremendous global pressure on both sides to back off and to tone down the tensions. So the Vajpayee government gave very clear instructions, especially for the Indian Air Force, which was effectively deployed. Right? While Indian Army fought from the ground, Indian Air Force played a critical role, bombing these occupied positions using guided weapons for the first time. Though US denied GPS navigation for our missiles, it was Israel which stepped up with advanced guided weapons that allowed the Indian Air Force to bomb these occupied territories. But the Indian Air Force was very strictly instructed to not breach the airspace, to not enter into Pakistan at any cost, because the intention was never to widen the conflict. So this was a limited conflict, restricted to the Kargil sector. It didn't spread beyond, right? It didn't spread into the Kashmir theater, into Punjab, Rajasthan, and Gujarat. It was restricted just to the Kargil Heights, and India eventually emerged on top with a decisive victory again, clearing all the intruders, evicting them, and retaking all these occupied heights in Kargil. So this definitely added to the friction and the bad blood that existed. But following this, something dramatic happened in Pakistan. Nawaz Sharif was toppled in a military coup staged by Parvez Musharraf. Parvez Musharraf took over the regime, establishing a military dictatorship and eventually electing himself as the president of Pakistan later on. Prior to this, the US was trying to mediate between India and Pakistan to reduce the tensions, especially after the Pokhran nuclear tests. Pakistan had followed up with its own nuclear tests. As the nuclear tensions and arms race had been triggered, US under Bill Clinton had put a lot of pressure on India. Later, even George Bush, who came in, put a lot of pressure on both the sides to negotiate, to talk, to reduce the tensions between each other. So there was tremendous American pressure and involvement, but despite that, India stood its ground. Though US denied access to GPS satellites, India managed to work around, right? Israel and few other nations, they stood with India, and India managed to evict the entire Pakistani intrusion attempt at Kargil. So this again shows how Pakistan goes to a great extent to cause trouble for India, to provoke India, right? As you can see, India has never been the aggressor in any of these conflicts. Another interesting conflict which exists till date, unresolved dispute, the Siachen dispute. I'm sure you must have heard of Siachen as the world's highest and the most expensive battlefield. Siachen is this triangular glacier located over here. You can see Pakistan occupied Kashmir and the Baltoro Glacier, which is part of Gilgit Baltistan. You can see the Shaksgam Valley, which I explained yesterday, which Pakistan has leased to China under the 1963 Sino-Pakistan border agreement. You can see Aksai Chin over here, which is occupied by China, right? You can see the line of control, the temporary de facto border, and the LOC ends over here. Can you see this point NJ9842? This is the northernmost point of LOC, where the demarcation ends. After this, there is no clear demarcation. So it's a very sensitive, strategically vital region for all three countries. For Pakistan, because of the Kashmir issue, this is where China's Xinjiang is located, to the north of Sakshgam Valley, right? Then towards the east, you have Aksai Chin, which is a dispute between India and China, claimed by India, occupied by China. So without a demarcation, this area is strategically vital. It basically gives a vantage point to look into Shaksgam Valley, to look into POK, to look into Aksai Chin as well. So with regard to control of Siachen, both India and Pakistan had a gentleman's agreement, a sort of an unwritten agreement, an unwritten convention of sorts. Until 1984, both sides had agreed to not permanently station troops and occupy the Siachen heights. Both would deploy troops in the lower altitudes, in the lower reaches during summer months only, because winters here are super harsh because of the extreme temperatures, which can drop to minus 30 degrees Celsius. The biggest threat for a soldier here is not the enemy. It is nature itself which becomes the biggest enemy, right? Most soldiers here suffer from frostbite or hypothermia and lose their lives, or they become victims of an avalanche. That is the biggest risk. And maintaining troops, maintaining logistics and supply lines is very, very expensive and challenging. So during winters, both sides had this unwritten agreement that they will withdraw the troops and they'll only station troops in the lower reaches until a solution is found, only during summer months. But Pakistan, being Pakistan, which has a history of betrayal and backstabbing India, it made an attempt in 1984 to carry out a preemptive occupation. When Indian troops had retreated during winter months, hoping Pakistan will also follow the same, Pakistan was busy making a plan, a nefarious plan to come and occupy Siachen during winter months. It was looking to surprise India, to shock India. When Indian troops arrive back in summer months, they would be shocked to see a permanent Pakistani outpost occupying Siachen. But the research and analysis wing picked up a vital piece of intelligence in Europe. Raw's London station received a tip off from a European defense manufacturer that Pakistani army had ordered a huge consignment of Arctic warfare equipment and Arctic clothing. So this intelligence that Raw picked up in Europe was passed on to Delhi. The entire strategic establishment met under Prime Minister Indira Gandhi to see as to why Pakistan was procuring Arctic gear. Why would Pakistan require this? Right? The only conclusion was Pakistan might make an attempt to take Siachen. So then, Prime Minister authorized a preemptive operation to overtake Pakistan and beat Pakistan at its own game. And India launched Operation Meghdoot, a preemptive operation led by the Indian Army, a very challenging task. And what is really interesting and quite ironic and even quite hilarious is that it is said that India ordered the same kind of Arctic gear and equipment from the same European manufacturer, got it delivered before Pakistan to preempt Pakistani plans. And Indian Army launched this massive operation to take Siachen before Pakistan could make the attempt. So Pakistan was hoping to surprise India, but when Pakistani troops arrived, they were shocked, they were surprised, as India had already taken over Siachen, especially the higher reaches of Siachen. So today we maintain a permanent position over here. Pakistan also maintains a position in the lower reaches, and it remains the world's highest battlefield and the most expensive battlefield. In the past, attempts have been made to demilitarize this region, to negotiate and find a solution to this issue. But since Pakistan cannot be trusted with any agreement, it has a habit of going back on its word, on its commitment. You can't allow history to repeat itself, right? So the Indian armed forces and the military establishment are firmly against demilitarizing Siachen. So it remains an ongoing dispute. Another major dispute is the Sir Creek dispute in the Run of Kutch region. If you're aware of the topography of the Kutch region in Gujarat, it's largely a marshy wetland, right? This is where the entire Indus basin it drains towards the Arabian Sea, creating a riverine wetland network. There are multiple estuaries, creeks that are present on both the sides. So the international border, the IB, which is basically your Radcliffe line, it's a permanent settled border between India and Pakistan. It stretches from Gujarat all the way towards Jammu. So between India Pakistan, please understand there are two types of boundaries we have. One is the international border, which is undisputed, where we have settled the boundary demarcation. We have fenced the entire stretch of the border as well, right? Stretches from the Kutch region of Gujarat, runs up till Punjab, all the way till the doorstep of Jammu. Then we have a temporary de facto border, the LOC, the line of control, in the Jammu Kashmir division, right? This is the temporary border, the ad hoc border until the Kashmir issue is finally settled. So after point NJ9842, after LOC ends, there is one dispute, which is Siachen. And here where IB almost ends, where the maritime borders are supposed to begin, there is one minor issue over Sir Creek. See, India just wants international principles to be followed when it comes to the boundary over here at Sir Creek. India wants the Talweg principle to be followed. It's also called the Talweg Doctrine. What is it? This is outlined under the UN clause, under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. As per the UN clause, under the Talweg principle, if a water body acts as a boundary between two nations, then the exact border is supposed to pass in the middle of the navigable channel so that both sides get a fair share. In the middle of the navigable channel, that's where the boundary line is supposed to pass as per the Talweg principle of the UN clause. And that is what India is insisting. But Pakistan being Pakistan, it is going against accepted international principles and claiming the entire Sir Creek to itself. Because see, this region serves a purpose for Pakistan, especially for the ISI. It makes use of the riverine wetland network to push smugglers and traffickers who engage in drugs and arms trafficking. It uses this route to even push terror elements to create security challenges for India. So look at how Pakistan has been misusing this route. And it explains why Pakistan is obsessed with taking the entire Sir Creek for itself. That's why a stretch of this is also called Harami Nala, as it is used by criminals, smugglers, criminal cartels, working with the ISI, smuggling drugs, arms, and weapons into India. The BSF maintains a very advanced patrol and surveillance network across this region. So this remains an unresolved dispute. It has implications for our exclusive economic zone and maritime boundaries as well. Depending on how the IB is drawn here at Sir Creek, it will result in alteration of the exclusive economic zone and the maritime boundaries. That is why Pakistan is eyeing the Sir Creek region, claiming the entire Sir Creek to itself, which is against the Talweg principle of the UN clause. So it remains a standing dispute till date. Now, one last point from my side. Why is Pakistan so obsessed with targeting India? That is the question we are trying to answer. See, it all goes back to the very creation of India and Pakistan. That's where the answer lies. Now, when you look at India's freedom movement, right? led by the Indian National Congress and various other sections of the Indian society. Eventually, it was a united struggle for freedom against British rule. But as part of the divide and rule policy of the British, they started encouraging radical extremist elements amongst both Hindus and Muslims. The communalization of our freedom movement, which paved the way for the Muslim League, the encouragement given to leaders like Jinnah, and the creation of a communal state, a theological state on religious lines like Pakistan. That is what sets up a fundamental difference between India and Pakistan, a ideological difference. India emerged as a secular state. Though the word secular was not added in the initial constitution, India as a civilization, India as a united freedom struggle during the movement, right, during the national movement, you do find a clear secular strand that was evident in our freedom struggle, a civilizational ideology where all cultures, religions were equally tolerated and respected. Whereas Pakistan turned inwards, turned towards radical faith, imposing a certain version of religion, targeting religious minorities, targeting people of any faith, even Muslims being targeted. Look at how Ahmadiyas, Hazaras, and Shias and Sufis have been targeted. Even Sunni Muslims, if they don't abide with the radical stand that Pakistan promotes, right, they are often targeted. And that religious persecution continues in Pakistan till date. So, this somewhere creates a mindset of insecurity. Pakistan feels insecure because it doesn't tolerate diversity. Diversity is what gives you strength. An open, progressive society has an inherent strength. That's one reason why the Indian civilization has stood the test of time, right? So Pakistan as a insecure state, it is much smaller in size compared to India with lesser resources, smaller armed forces. That is what drives the psyche, the mentality, right? The thinking, the decision making of the Pakistani elite, primarily the Punjabi elite. You look at all the top Pakistani leaders, from their army chiefs to ISI generals to their politicians, they all come from the Punjabi heartland. Look at the Nawaz Sharif family or parties like Pakistan Muslim League, the Nawaz Sharif faction, including Shehbaz Sharif, Nawaz Sharif's daughter, who is the chief minister of Punjab, right? Or look at Pakistan People's Party of the Bhutto Zardari family. It's all dynastic politics, right? In many South Asian countries. Look at the top leaders. They are primarily from the Punjabi heartland, right? Look at their army and ISI and military leadership. They all come from the Punjabi heartland. So there is a clear discrimination within Pakistan. Baloch region is discriminated. Sindh is discriminated. Every other region is discriminated. No wonder today Pakistan is facing its biggest crisis, right? The Baloch liberation movement, the Sindh nationalist movement, then the TTP, or the Pakistan Taliban, especially in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, carrying out massive attacks against the Pakistani state, protests in POK, protests even in Gilgit-Baltistan. So Pakistan is essentially, it's a contradiction, right? It has contradicted itself. Its obsession with radical theology, its obsession about targeting India, weakening India, destabilizing India, has come back to bite Pakistan today, right? It became a terror factory, essentially. It worked with United States back in 1979, 1980 to use the Durand Line along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border to create the Afghan Mujahideen, to back the Pashtun fighters in Afghanistan in order to resist the Soviet invasion, which we covered in our very first class in the NCERT course. The CIA colluded with Pakistan's ISI, received funds from Saudi Arabia as well. And Pakistan became pivotal to create the Afghan Mujahideen as an insurgent resistance against Soviet forces. Now, Pakistan turned the very same infrastructure towards India. It used the same terror facilities, right? It used the same radical seminaries, madrasas, which had been set up to fund a very radical, misinterpreted version of Islam called Salafism, Wahhabism, to create anti-India terror groups. Its initial covert involvement began primarily in Punjab, right? It had meddled in the Northeast previously, but the first major covert war of Pakistan was focused on Punjab, where it backed the Khalistan movement. Then it got directly involved in the separatist movement, the insurgency terrorism that broke out in Kashmir. And it all traces back to the dual power control that exists in Pakistan, where the civilian government is just there for the namesake, you know the real authority where it lies. It lies with the deep state. If you ask who's the most powerful leader or individual in Pakistan, it is no doubt the army chief. And today, Asim Munir, as I explained in my previous sessions, has consolidated all power and authority following the 27th Constitutional Amendment Act. He has almost become like a supreme leader with almost total control over the government. After discarding Imran Khan and Tehreek-e-Insaf, Pakistani deep state has now formed a coalition government by bringing two political rivals together, by bringing the Nawaz Sharif clan with the Zardari Bhutto clan and creating a coalition between Pakistan Muslim League and Pakistan People's Party. This is just about survival for the Pakistani army, right? It explains why attacks like Pahalgam, attacks like 2611 are often planned. Because this is how the deep state can legitimize itself, consolidate more power and authority. For that, they need a constant enemy in the form of India. Again, it all goes back to 1970s, post 1971, the humiliating defeat that the Pakistani state suffered and the strategy they adopted to bleed India with 1,000 cuts. Because see, covert proxy war is cheaper, it's effective compared to a conventional war. Pakistan learnt in 1971 that India is a conventionally superior military power which can't be defeated in the battlefield. The only way Pakistan can protract the war and basically frustrate India, weaken India, is through an asymmetric war. That's why it has focused on terrorism as a weapon. It has grabbed every opportunity which has been opened up in India, from Northeast to Punjab to Kashmir, to all the communal conflicts and riots in India, using that to create recruits for terrorism, using it as a weapon because a covert proxy war is cheaper in terms of money involved, in terms of human lives at risk. So for Pakistan, it becomes convenient, right? It can sustain this conflict, drag it for years and decades. It's already been 5 decades of Pakistan's sustained covert proxy war against India. So, be it the support it has given to Northeast insurgent groups like Naga insurgents, Mizo insurgents, Bodo insurgents like NDFB, even Ulfa in Assam, they all had connections with the ISI, mainly through Bangladesh. Pakistan was directly aiding and supporting Northeast insurgent outfits. It briefly had links with Naxals as well. Then, following its involvement with the Afghan Mujahideen, it diverted the same funds and arms and weapons towards Punjab and Kashmir. There is a direct link between Khalistan movement and Kashmir insurgency terrorism, connecting it with Afghan conflict. Pakistan was flooded with arms, weapons, and money coming from US and Saudi Arabia, right, who were fighting Soviet Union in a covert war. And Pakistan was too important for them. They didn't care what Pakistan did with all the money, with all the weapons. So conveniently, Pakistan diverted a part of the same consignment of arms, weapons, and money to fuel the Khalistan movement and later insurgency terrorism in Kashmir, right? Be it the escalation in Khalistan movement in 1980s, the support given to multiple Khalistani outfits like Babar Khalsa International, Khalistan Commando Force, and the others. And later, post 1987, as separatist movement broke out in Kashmir, Pakistan got directly involved to set up anti-India terror groups from Lashkar-e-Toiba to Hizbul Mujahideen to Harkatul Mujahideen and many others, eventually Jaish-e-Mohammed. They all have one purpose, which is to keep the Kashmir issue on the boil, to keep India destabilized. Or look at how Pakistan has exploited the communal divisions, especially after Babri Masjid incident, the Godhra incident, exploiting this across Indian cities from Delhi to Mumbai to Karnataka to Tamil Nadu, creating local recruits, creating groups like Indian Mujahideen, attacking Indian cities repeatedly, targeting Indian civilians. So this has become Pakistan's bread and butter. It's their strategy to remain relevant. It's their approach to ensure that the deep state remains in control. For that, they need enmity with India. So as you can see, every incident of provocation from Pakistan is designed with the same objective, which is to target India, to destabilize India, and ensure that the army and the deep state remain relevant in Pakistan. So that is what I wanted to discuss today. I really hope you guys are enjoying these classes, and I hope this session in particular was eye-opening and insightful. If you benefited, do let me know in the comments. Do press the like button. Share these videos with other aspirants because it will help a lot of beginners, especially those who are new to study international relations. So that is it. Thanks for watching. Good night, and I'll see you tomorrow.